Aaron Rodgers trade to the Jets?
Packers and Jets have been negotiating for weeks. As of now, they are not there yet on agreeing to compensation for Aaron Rodgers, who, of course, declared his intentions on the Pat McAfee show last week, saying his intention now is to play and to play for the Jets. So the Packers are not looking for the type of package that the Broncos gave up last year for Russell Wilson, which was 2 2s, 2 1s, and 3 players. They're not looking for multiple ones like the Rams ended up giving up in the Matthew Stafford deal on top of Jared Goff, though Goff had a bloated contract. There were some moving parts now, and the calculus is a little bit different. They're also not, the Packers are not going to take the type of, third-round pick that Matt Ryan brought the Falcons last year during that trade. Somewhere in between is the magic formula of how this trade gets done. They're not far apart, but they're not close at this point. So where are the important checkpoints as we move forward? Well, 1 week from now, all the teams will be in Arizona for the NFL League meeting, which means Brian Gutekunst, Joe Douglas in the same place, at least for a while. I don't know with pro days how much they'll be there. Mark Murphy, Woody Johnson will be in the same place as well. The next real checkpoint along the line in terms of the pressure point is going to be the draft, which is the last week of April. Because at that point, if we get beyond the draft, now the Packers aren't getting 2023 draft picks that help you this year. Now, any draft capital is out into 2024 and beyond. And so that's going to be where perhaps it's okay. Do we take the best thing possible right now, the Jets' best offer, or do we go beyond it? Because if you go beyond it, this is George Costanza driving his in-laws to a non-existent house in the Poconos. This is full on like, okay, you got Jets, you want to ruin your season? We can go as long as you want to go. Because there's no reason then the Packers logistically have to do anything with Aaron Rodgers until you get into training camp. Now, obviously the Jets at some point would want Rodgers to be there late July when they open camp. Rodgers can, even though he's still under contract with the Packers, there's no rules barring him from, booking flights for all the Jets wide receivers, and Alan Lazard and his buddies, and bringing them all out to California to throw with them there and kind of get the training. He already knows the offense because Nathaniel Hackett was with him in Green Bay. But in terms of actually getting him on the field, the trade obviously has to be executed. So if you don't get something done by the start of training camp, now we're into a different phase of the stare down where the only remaining checkpoint is really the day before the regular season opener, which is where the Packers would have to exercise Aaron Rodgers' option bonus. Now, at that point, the Packers have to make a decision. Either way, they owe him $60 million at that point. But the Jets are so far beyond actually getting him integrated that it's hard to imagine it goes that far. So, again, the real checkpoint here to watch, the pressure point, is going to be that week of the NFL draft. Could happen before then.
Yeah.
Could be one phone call today. Just, you know what? You're right. Deal done. I don't get the sense over the last couple of days that anything has moved substantially. It could change today again with one phone call. But if not, and if they don't work out something face-to-face next week, then really you're talking about getting right down to draft week before potentially you have a resolution.
Can you indulge us a scenario? Let's say that the Jets are negotiating and working and working and working, and the Packers just won't blink and won't blink. And the Jets say, we're changing plans. We're not in the Aaron Rodgers business anymore, and we're going to make do either with Zach Wilson or we're going to pick up a free agent, and they're out. What do the Packers do with Rodgers then?
Well, first of all, the Jets, the options have dwindled for the Jets. Because unless you're going to go all in on Lamar Jackson, who are you going to get?
Zach Wilson.
You're going to sign Blaine Gabbert?
Yeah.
I mean, they're absolutely going to sign a veteran. They're not just going to roll
make a trade for maybe a guy like Tannehill.
If he becomes available, that would be another potential pivot point. There's a connection there with Todd Downing being on the staff with the Jets now. But they're very much all in on Aaron Rodgers at this point. The owner is very much all in on Aaron Rodgers at this point. So, I mean, could that happen? Hypothetically, sure. Aaron Rodgers is only counting $32 million or so on the Packers salary cap right now. It's a number they budgeted for because there was a time in this offseason where they thought, hey, he might come back.
Yeah.
We want him back as long as he's fully bought in. That obviously Rodgers made certain decisions on his end. I want to go this other direction. Obviously, if they'd worked out the trade prior to giving Rodgers permission to speak to the Jets, this is all a lot simpler.
Yeah.
My understanding was they had those talks. They couldn't agree to it. You're on a timeline here. You can't just keep pushing the initial conversation back. So you need answers. And so they said, okay, you can talk to him, and then we're going to work out the trade compensation. They're not there yet. I don't see much of a scenario where the Jets pivot off it until you absolutely have to. Now, could that happen at the end of July? Could that happen into August? It depends in part. Does somebody else shake loose? Is there some other opportunity that arises here? But very much, they want Aaron Rodgers to be the quarterback of the Jets. Aaron Rodgers wants to be the quarterback of the Jets. there's a pretty big thing that still needs to take place. And I appreciate Aaron narrowing this down for us. It's all about the trade. That's what it's been about for several weeks now. And we'll see if they can bridge that gap.
Let's flip it from the Jets, though, back to the Packers. As your point is that they're one of the major stoppages in the clock is the draft, and that is if they want compensation for this year's draft. But the Packers aren't a bad team. It's not like they are in dire need of like more picks for this year's draft. This year's draft is highly skilled. But what about like the sliding scale trade of like what we saw with Stafford, which is the Lions? Stafford went to the Rams, but then the Rams weren't good, and the Lions got better and better picks as the year went on. Is there a world where the Packers are like, you know what, we don't need picks this year. We'd rather make a deal for next year, and if you guys are good, if the Jets get to a place, or you're terrible, our pick slides. Like, how do those drafts work?
The way that NFL teams generally look at picks is if you get a pick a year later, it's like downgrading it around. A first-round pick next year is like a second-round pick this year. Now, there's an argument to be made because of the quarterbacks at the top of the 2024 draft, and we won't name names, but I think everybody who watches college football knows who they are. You could argue that 2024 draft picks are actually more valuable right now because if you're a team that's going to try to trade up and get a quarterback in next year's draft, amassing that capital at this time is beneficial to you. Or conversely, if you're the Packers and you got Jordan Love and you think he's your long-term answer, having those picks that somebody might want to trade up for might give you more collateral. But this is very much a Packers team that thinks that they can win with this roster. They've got weapons, albeit young ones, guys like Christian Watson, who we saw have an amazing second half of the season after he finally overcame the injuries. They've got some players on defense. There's a long way that they have to go. But this is not a tear-it-down rebuild thing, and they don't want to set up Jordan Love for failure.
Can that guy play at all?
Jordan Love?
Yeah, we have no idea.
If you're Green Bay, don't you want to get it done? It's like you just said, surround him, draft a receiver maybe in the first round, get as much talent around him to give him the best-case scenario, especially in year one with Rodgers leaving.
But do you do that at the expense of getting less than you think that the player is worth? Right. Because if you're willing to say, we don't care about the 2023 draft picks, the moment you get past the draft, now your leverage actually goes up in terms of the Jets have to make the deal, and they're on the timeline here. So, yes, to get 2023 draft picks, the pressure point for the Packers is before the NFL draft. If it doesn't get done before then, then you're into crazy town here, where there's a lot of different things that can happen. I mean, go back when Brett Favre,
we all do.
When Brett Favre divorced from the Packers in 2008, I was on the beat at the Green Bay Press-Gazette. Okay, I'm sitting on a lawn chair outside the loading dock, staring in, waiting for Favre to come out after meeting all day with Mike McCarthy and Ted Thompson during camp. And this is at a time that the fans are booing Aaron Rodgers on the practice field. It's all going on. Favre takes a helicopter in during the family night scrimmage in like a lightning storm. We're all wondering, is the helicopter going to get hit by lightning and Favre's going to be dead? It was a bizarre scene.
He had been in an armadillo ranch in Mississippi. I'm not making that up. That really was.
And this had been months of this, where he was doing interviews on Greta Van Susteren on Fox News.
Right.
Two whole shows with Greta Van Susteren, where it was just Favre talking.
A lot of Bus Cook, and his name was everywhere.
And Ted Thompson, who was a always reticent type of a GM, did very little public facing, actually set up a series of one-on-one interviews in June because Favre was saying so much and the Packers weren't defending themselves. It got to the point the Packers needed to lay out their timeline. So I was one of the reporters selected to go and sit down with Ted one-on-one on like a hot June morning. And it still was 2 months away from resolution. Favre had to show up, and the Packers were they were being asked, is he going to practice? Is Favre going to be on the field? And they had to be like, well, we're working through it. One of the big differences in that situation was the Packers approached that like a normal trade. They talked to multiple different teams. It actually came down to the Bucks or the Jets at that time. Favre wanted to go to the Bucks because they were playing the Packers, I want to say, in like week 4, and he wanted to play them. He wanted to be in the conference and be able to play his old team. Ted Thompson didn't want Favre in the conference, so ultimately they agreed with the Jets. Favre then had to accept the trade with the Jets. They had long conversations with none other than Woody Johnson, who, of course, was just on a plane out to California to see Aaron Rodgers. They sold him on, hey, we got some land outside of New York where you can go hunt on your off days. They sold Favre on this whole thing. This was the trade compensation. Okay, it was Favre and a future 7th for a 3rd-round pick, which if you're Aaron Rodgers, you're sitting there and saying, I was there. I remember what happened with Brett. Why are you trying to get more than that for me? Rodgers is actually older now than Favre was then, which is somebody who's covered that entire span in the NFL makes me feel extraordinarily old. But if you're Rodgers, you don't want the Jets giving up a whole bunch of picks. that you could use to build up the team right now when you're maybe on a one-year plan with the Jets. I want the maximum value. So you got a lot of
the Packers are asking for some stuff the Jets don't want to give. This is the same thing with Lamar. Whatever Lamar's asking for, the Ravens don't want to give. And I just look at the 13th overall pick, and the Jets have it, and I bet the Packers want it. We're giving you Rodgers. Give us the 13. And if I had to pick one sticking point in this, I bet they don't want to, and they're saying give it to us. It's Rodgers. They're asking for something that they won't give. And
even if you get a one next year, to bring up that point again, what are the odds with Aaron Rodgers and that talented young roster that the pick is higher than number 13?
Yeah.
Odds are it's going to be lower. Odds are it's going to be a worse pick, and it's a year away. So, I mean, it's complicated. Like, I can't think of a lot of situations that are similar. There were some similarities with Russell Wilson last year where it was very much only going to be one team, but they tried to negotiate in that what they thought was a fair way to work out the trade. And obviously Russell Wilson didn't play well in year one, but you're betting all that draft capital on the fact that this guy is going to be your player, not just for this year, but for years to come, which is also one of the things. Last year, if Rodgers had been traded, it would have cost the Broncos less to get him than it took to get Russell Wilson, even though Rodgers was coming off consecutive MVPs. Why? Because with Aaron Rodgers, you're getting the whole picture. Yes, the player who's won 4 NFL MVPs, but also the annual will he or won't he dance, and you have no idea what the situation's going to be in 2024.